Good afternoon, YouTube family. Glad to be here. Glad to be back. It's been a while. It's been about 2 weeks since my last YouTube live. So much has been going on in my life. Been finishing a move, finishing transition, finishing transformation. So I'm grateful for it. Thank you for joining me. If you're just watching this now, don't hesitate to subscribe, like, and share my YouTube. Please spread the word about my work, about my two books. I'm coming up with a third book about the scholarship of Tony Martin. I'm very excited about that. And so please watch, like, share, comment, subscribe, and share my work. My perspective is very important. It adds harmony to the world and raises vibration that needs to be raised. So a few topics I want to talk about on my YouTube live today. The first is the passing of an incredible mentor to me that meant so much to me, who I met in 2010 at an academic conference. My sister and I were in the same city that this conference took place. Shout out to Dr. Markeisha Davis for inviting me to a academic conference where Professor John Bracey was. That was the first and last time I'll get to interact with him personally. He just transitioned on February 5th of this year. Um, but what he did was absolutely incredible in terms of sharing an autonomous Black Studies department at UMass for decades. I remember first encountering John Bracey, watching Dante Jones and Juan Williams's film on A. Philip Randolph called For Jobs and for Freedom. And Professor Bracey's comments about A. Philip Randolph and the whole industry, well, really the whole union, the whole trade union of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. He made a point in that film that I'll never forget, and that was the demise of the Pullman Company because of the technological advancement of planes. He made a point that the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters that started in 1925, within a decade of 1925, by 1935, it had become more or less obsolete because of the technological advancement where the wealthiest were not relying on Pullman cars to get around the country. They were relying by the 30s on planes. So he just brought the whole topic of industrialization to a new level for me, and how capital always tries to be stronger than labor. And um, his his appearance in that film for Jobs and for Freedom really underscored. It's a great lesson for anybody who's interested in knowing the dynamic between capital and labor. What he said about the Pullman Company, which represented capital, versus labor, which was represented by the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters that A. Philip Randolph was leading since 1925. He's an awesome labor historian. I shared with my students an amazing film, an amazing lecture he gave at Greenfield Community College here. This photo of called Haitian History and Future Prospects. Two amazing points he made in this lecture. The first that really struck me was how he makes the point that the U.S. would not be the U.S. without. Making sure y'all hear me. Yeah, the US would not be the US without San Domingo and without that revolution happening. And he makes the point about how nobody really valued the land in the Louisiana Territory. Nobody valued that land because they didn't know what to do with it. We know that the Louisiana Territory became the site of many slave plantations. But what Professor Bracey makes clear in that lecture is that the Haitian Revolution caused the westward expansion of the United States. So he drives home the point that without San Domingo, there would be no US. So check out this lecture. It's on YouTube. It's called Haitian History and Future Prospects by Professor John Bracey. We thank him for his scholarship, his example of leading a Black Studies department. And so interesting that he would transition at the time that DeSantis in Florida, the governor, declined to allow AP African American Studies in high schools. But this is what underscores what I said in my previous YouTube. Make sure you're not depending on the state or you're not depending on public schools for getting your education about Black history. Homeschooling, parental schooling, study groups are absolute awesome sources of getting information other than the mainstream public school system. So John Bracey really represented that just in the lay lectures he gives, such as this one, Haitian History and Future Prospects. Make sure you check out that lecture. Another point he makes in that lecture that I thought was very striking was that um, he said that between the time Toussaint was kidnapped, which is 1804, and the time that the US recognized Haiti, which it wasn't 1804. Thomas Jefferson didn't recognize it. It was until 1860, I believe, that the US formally recognized um, Haiti. And he said that in New Orleans, slaves have a bill of sale, and if a slave's bill of sale stated that they were from San Domingo, they were not to be sold in the United States. So that just struck me how resistant the United States was to any sort of trade with Haiti, with San Domingo, and it just reminded me of how white supremacy is something that has to have people who believe in it to continue. And we have the power, which is why I believe in information. We have the real power to really see a different world, interpret a different world, other than the world that historically white supremacists have wanted. It makes me want to look at a particular book on this topic of Haitian history that John Bracey has brought up. It's a new book that I noticed on Twitter, that I saw on Twitter. The author is Ronald Angelo Johnson, and the book is called Diplomacy in Black and White, John Adams, Toussaint Louverture, and their Atlantic World Alliance. It made me, really respect John Adams, who was the second president of the United States. And the fact that he was the lawyer for the plaintiffs in the Boston Massacre. He was not a slave owner, but you could tell he believed in the values of America. And you could tell, you have to assume that he treated and thought of Toussaint as a man, just like Toussaint was, just like Adams himself. So this book that I saw on Twitter really piqued my interest. It's called Diplomacy in Black and White. The subtitle is John Adams, Toussaint Louverture, and their Atlantic World Alliance. It's clearly a history of their correspondence, John Adams' correspondence and Toussaint Louverture. And I knew that this kind of book could never be written about letters between Thomas Jefferson, because Jefferson had very white supremacist beliefs, and would not maintain a correspondence with Toussaint the way that the second US president did, John Adams. So I'm interested in cracking this book and just seeing exactly what John Adams wrote to Toussaint about. I will read this book, Diplomacy in Black and White by Ronald Johnson, being aware of the farewell address that George Washington issued that Thomas Jefferson totally ignored, warning the United States against getting into entangling alliances. And anytime you have to enforce an embargo like Thomas Jefferson did, you are becoming a police of the world, which, as we know, in 2023, the US working with NATO is trying to be, trying to police Ukraine, trying to police Africa, trying to police other parts of the world, trying to police China. George Washington, our original president, always warned against entangling alliances. And without a doubt, that farewell address will probably be a looming presence for me in this book. It will be a looming presence for me in this book, which is called Diplomacy in Black and White. So thank you, John Bracey, for your example. A lot of tweets about James Baldwin are coming out since the tragic death that so many people saw. I refuse to see it, of Tyree Nichols at the hands of Memphis police officers. This particular one struck me by the Hillman Files Twitter page. It quotes Baldwin, April 1967. "We hated the policemen not all of whom were Jewish and some of whom were Black. The poor of whatever reason, the poor of whatever color do not trust the law and certainly have no reason so. And God knows we didn't. If you must call a cop, we said in those days, for God's sake, make sure it's a white one. We did not feel that the cops were protecting us, for we knew too much about the reasons for the kinds of crimes committed in the ghetto. But, Baldwin writes, we feared Black cops even more than white cops because the Black cop had to work so much harder on your head to prove himself and his colleagues that he was not like all other N words. And so that reminded me of, I've been studying more Bobby Wright, the psychologist Bobby Wright, who wrote about menticide. And there's a YouTube video of a group of different scholars who knew him personally and talk about his impact on their life. This is definitely an opportunity for us to really look closer at the work of Black psychologists. I think the death of Tyree Nichols should prompt all of us to engage the work of Black psychologists instead of um, depending on Benjamin Crump for any kind of justice. Don't depend on Twitter. Don't depend on the same venues. I appreciated what Barrington Salmon and Mimi Machado said in their interview with Jackie Luqman yesterday on Speak Freely about the whole industry of Black death, and it's become entertainment. It has not become a rallying cry to stop police brutality more than it's become entertainment. Who's the new Black male that we'll watch today or we'll watch next month, question mark, or we'll watch next year? It's becoming a spectacle. And so I'm leery of real serious attempts to stop these kind of murders because it's become commonplace. And as Barrington said yesterday in his YouTube live video interview with Jackie Luqman, um, it's desensitizing us as a people to Black death. And we're now thinking it's normal and it's acceptable. And anytime we get there, that's a serious problem. The one I was trying to remember, the one quote by, and please comment. I see we have some viewers here. Please comment if you're watching this. Please comment live. You can always give also to my Cash App, which I appreciate. It's $ my name, Ron Fraser. $ my name, Ron Fraser, to give to my Cash App. Donations are absolutely appreciated. And please subscribe, share, like if you're watching now. Don't hesitate to comment. Um, the Library of America issued an amazing collection of James Baldwin's nonfiction. And one of those pieces is his 1976 collection of essays called The Devil Finds Work, which I think is an amazing collection of essays. And Baldwin says roughly the same thing he said in 67. Blacks know something about Black cops too, he writes, even those called Mr. in Philadelphia. They know that their presence on the force doesn't change the force or the judges or the lawyers or the bondsmen or the jails. They know the Black cop's mother and his father. They may have met the sister, and they know the younger or the older brother who may be a bondsman or a junkie or a student in limbo at Yale. They know how much the Black cop has to prove and how limited are his means of proving it. Where I grew up, Black cops were yet more terrifying than white ones. Um, and so that was a thought about Black cops in light of the murder of Tyree Nichols. And then I found out recently that one of the cops' baby's mother was somebody that Tyree Nichols was dating. So that also played a role of sexual jealousy, playing a role in the death of Tyree Nichols. But the whole spectacle of it, I have to emotionally detach myself from because I'm excited about working with people to end police brutality instead of making a spectacle of it where all of us as a people who are watching that kind of murder are desensitized to it. That's quickly becoming a problem for me. Um, so also who made news. So my before I leave this topic, I do want to say my condolences to the family of Tyree Nichols, um, his child, um, his child's mom, who had to see that. Let's really work together to stop this chain from Trayvon Martin um, to Michael Brown to now Tyree Nichols. This chain the mainstream media seems to be actively producing of black male death, creating a spectacle of it, just like the lynching one times. I work, I pray to work with them or pray that they find forces to stop that cycle until we as a nation take more seriously all of our lives, not just black men, but white men, and just as people, just stop making spectacle of death as a fake way of trying to stop it, as a fake way of trying to stop it. I wanted to shout out someone who came up in the news recently. I like this photo by Alberto Borrego, particularly because it has Jose Marti in the background, and that was absolutely someone in Cuban history who Elian and his Cuban comrades knew about growing up. You're taught who he is in school. And so when we think about the United States, in public schools, we're taught George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. Um, who are we taught in terms of important leaders in African American history? Are we taught about Marcus Garvey? I know I wasn't. I learned about him and I'm starting to write books about him in my 40s, right? But nowhere in my teens, nowhere in my 20s did I learn about Marcus Garvey. But I know Elian learned about Jose Marti in his teens. And so the caption of this photo says, Alberto Borrego, Cuba's youth today, he says, is the same as that of 15 years ago. I think this photo was taken closer to 2005, 2005. He's older than this now. But Elian Gonzalez looms long in my mind because when I was 14 years old, I remember the video footage of Janet Reno going into the family of his mother. So the story of Elian Gonzalez is his mother fled Cuba in the mid 90s for a better life. However, um, on the way from Cuba to Florida, she ended up drowning, and Elian landed in Florida with her family. And the father was who was born and raised in Cuba. It became a custody battle to retrieve his son because he did not agree uh, with his mother fleeing Cuba. So the coverage of it brought up all sorts of debates about whether a life in Cuba is better or whether a life in Florida is better. Florida, United States. Whether a life in the United States is better. And it just, for me, brings up a whole lot of issues about um, the differences between a socialist society, which is not perfect, and a capitalist society, which we also know is not perfect, in terms of, once again, making spectacle of Black death. Um, this whole case brought up issues. I noticed from Twitter on the grandma underscore English Twitter account, which is the official newspaper of the Cuban Communist Party, that Elian Gonzalez has recently become a Cuban lawmaker. He'll become a prominent Cuban lawmaker as of this month. And so I found that so interesting because it reminded me of Janet Reno, who was then the Attorney General. I remember clearly seeing the Coast Guard transport go into the house of Elian Gonzalez in Florida, retrieve him, and transport him back to Cuba. I didn't know what to think about it at 15, but now at 43, I applaud that decision by Janet Reno. It kind of reminds me of Judge Judy when she has plaintiffs who are women, who are mothers, who in Judge Judy's judgment are deliberately withholding their child from their father. And in ruling against those women, Judge Judy makes clear a child has as much right to be with the mother as with the father. And And after thinking, after seeing Elian Gonzalez, knowing he's become a lawmaker, remembering that video footage of Janet Reno and feeling the anger. I felt a lot of anger. It wasn't from me personally, but it was a lot of emotional anger of the white Cubans at the liberal Democrat Janet Reno, then under the Clinton administration, um, forcibly removing Elian. I remember the rage they felt. Why is she doing this? And now I've come at 43 to understand the value of that decision, the wisdom of it, and Janet Reno basically restoring family values. The child does not deserve to be with the mother's family, even though the mother died, more than he deserves to be with his father. You know, if it's between the mother's family, who chose not to raise her child with values of a socialist country, um, then better than the family of the mother who lives in capitalist United States, Florida, better than the mother is for him to be with his father. So it just, yeah, the Cuban case of Elian Gonzalez just brings back very vivid memories about the question of capitalism versus socialism, not so much communism. I don't think Cuba is a communist country because things are not public there. They're group owned. So for me, it's more socialist. Uh, but seeing him and knowing that he's become a lawmaker, he will become aware. He's uniquely aware. Elian Gonzalez is of how many Cubans might be led to believe that a life in the U.S. is better. And as a Jamaican, of parents who are Jamaican, we talk a lot about particular Jamaicans in our family who, if they came here, I've heard conversations of my parents, if such and such in Jamaica lived here, they would die. Lived in the US, they would die because of XYZ and ABC. And so Elian has that perspective. He understands why Cubans would not want to live in the US as somebody whose mother took him, but who was brought back from Florida to Cuba. So it was just an incredible opportunity for me. He this is from the Granma article. Elian Gonzalez, the youth aren't the future, they're the present, he says. The return, and this was written, as you can see, in 2015, 7 years ago. 8 years ago. The return of little Elian Gonzalez to the homeland 15 years ago represented a victory for the Cuban people and their battle of ideas. Granma spoke to young Elian, industrial engineering student at Camilo Cienfuegos University of Matanzas. And in this interview, what really struck me is his answer to this question. When he was asked, "What are your future plans?" he says, "I'm currently in my fourth year studying industrial engineering at the Camilo Cienfuegos University of Matanzas. And I'm hoping to serve in the Revolutionary Armed Forces once I graduate," he says. "I have a lot to thank the world." And I was hoping he would thank Janet Reno because, she restored family values and making sure that he was brought back to his family. My father, the Comandante, and my family and when I say my family, I mean the Cuban people in general. My life in Cuba, I owe to these people, and it is for them that I will always work, struggle, to whom I owe all my respect. 15 years after I returned, I realized that the Cuban people still consider me as part of their family, and this is my debt to try to repay that love. And so, working for the government as an engineer for the government rather than private industry, which is what we're taught all in the US to work for because you'll make money. The whole point is making individual money in the US. Whereas um, gas station workers in Cuba who I talk to who have terminal research degrees um, are earning a wage that they cannot save on, but they're clear on the value of their nation to the world, not only because it's socialist, but as Fidel Castro told Barbara Walters, their ability to send doctors all across the world instead of armed soldiers, their ability to send life-saving medicines instead of automatic assault rifles. So even though that gas station worker with a terminal degree couldn't save money to retire on, he was still someone who, like Elian, was proud of the values of his nation and would not want to leave that nation, even if given that opportunity. So this part of the interview really stuck out to me. Once again, if you're just watching this, don't forget to subscribe, share, and like. And if you've appreciated what I shared, my Cash App is $Ron Fraser. And please subscribe, share, and like. I welcome comments. I welcome comments here. Thank you, Mimi, for the comment you gave me on my 29th YouTube Live. I absolutely appreciated it. It was encouraging and amazing. Last thing I want to look at is, I read in the New Yorker the article, which was a Kianga Yamada Taylor interviewing Robin D.G. Kelly about the DeSantis uh, declining AP African American Studies. For me, this is an opportunity for those in African American studies to stop boycotting and censoring the work of Tony Martin. So I received this email in my inbox. This is from Paula Krebs, who is the director of the Modern Language Association. Thank you, Annabelle, for the applause. I appreciate it. Thank you, Annabelle. This email from Paula Krebs says, as you can read, dear colleague, in the last several months, we've seen a disturbing new effort to take control of education away from educators. Mind you, I had applied to the Modern Language Association conference with a panel with distinguished scholars, Dr. Ian Smart, Dr. Wendy McBurney, who studied in translation. And the topic of the panel that I proposed to the Modern Language Association was the scholarship of Tony Martin. So what the MLA is saying here, is clearly hypocritical. What they're saying here is the appalling takeover of the New College of Florida to the College Board's decision to revise the content of its advanced placement of African American Studies course. These actions represent a grievous threat to academic freedom. For me, that's totally hypocritical because they censor the work of Tony Martin. My panel that I proposed to the MLA, not only the MLA, but also the American Historical Association, completely censors discussion of the scholarship of Tony Martin. And that's hypocritical. That's disingenuous to claim that you care about advanced placement African American studies happening in the public schools in Florida, but at the same time ignoring, censoring scholarship about Marcus Garvey by Tony Martin. So it's hard for me to believe, I got this email like, you can't expect me to take you seriously when you censor Tony Martin, when you censor Dr. Tony Martin's scholarship. So right now I'm in the process of preparing a petition to really have this be an opportunity for the MLA to get rid of its hypocrisy, to allow discussion in their conferences that's every year on Tony Martin. Because when I proposed one 3 years ago, they accepted it. I mean, no, they did not accept it. They received it. They gave me zero notice about it not being accepted. All I knew was that when I looked at the program, I emailed, have I been accepted? Got no response from the leader, from the leader's secretary. So it was highly offensive. So to read this, now you care about AP African American Studies because elite Black liberals who control African American studies tell you what to think? No, they don't tell me what to think. Sorry. Even in terms of the content and what is proposed, be very careful that the people who are complaining about Black studies aren't the same ones who are trying to dominate it the same way that history has been dominated by a European conservative perspective. So keep that in mind as we listen. Make sure you use John Henrik Clarke's critique of Cornel West, his critique of Henry Louis Gates, put that in context when really reading the complaints about DeSantis and African American studies. All right. Thank you so much for your time. If you enjoyed this live 30th YouTube Live, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. I thank you for your attention. My Cash App is $Ron Fraser. If you enjoyed it, don't hesitate to give a donation. God bless you. Keep reading and keep the faith.